It started with a whisper, the kind of rumor that drifts through the void between stars, carried on encrypted channels, spoken of in hushed tones by species who knew better than to say it aloud. The Cathari Directorate, one of the most advanced research collectives in the galaxy, had captured a human. Not just encountered, not just observed from afar, but captured, alive, intact, breathing, and very much aware. To the Federation, it was unthinkable. To the Directorate, it was an opportunity. To the rest of the galaxy, it was a mistake waiting to happen. The Cathari believed themselves untouchable. They had built their reputation on cold precision and clinical understanding. For centuries, they studied life in its rawest forms, dissecting everything they touched. They mapped neural patterns, catalogued genetic codes, and dismantled entire species for scientific advancement. Morality to them was a primitive word. They had dissected predators with teeth sharp enough to bite through steel, catalogued parasites that devoured stars, and tamed creatures that could collapse dimensions with a single thought. And yet, none of those conquests prepared them for what sat in their sterile chamber now. The human. He looked ordinary, at least to Cathari eyes. Soft-skinned, bipedal, hair covering his head, scars trailing across his arms like faint road maps of a violent past. No claws, no wings, no fangs that glistened, no venom sacs or hidden spines. His muscles looked wiry but not unnatural, his eyes dull blue beneath the harsh lighting. They saw nothing remarkable, just another animal to dissect, another puzzle to solve. But the Cathari had made their first mistake. They mistook appearance for truth. The experiment began the way it always did. Probes attached to his skin, wires trailing like silver veins into humming machines, sedatives pumped into his blood to keep him docile. Recordings began, their tones clinical and detached. Subject responds to neural probes. One researcher noted their voice monotone. No visible aggression. Motor functions slowed. Neural activity within acceptable parameters. But the human's eyes flickered. Even as chemicals coursed through him, dulling his reflexes, he was watching, measuring them, not with fear, but with calculation. The researchers asked questions, their voices processed through translators that stumbled over human syntax. Why do your species persist? Why do you resist integration into the Federation? Why do you fight when you cannot win? The human smiled, a faint curl of the lips that the researchers mistook for unconscious muscle twitching. But it was not unconscious. It was deliberate, a smile in the language of predators. Hours turned into days. They starved him. They deprived him of sleep. They exposed him to pain, heat, cold, pressure. They tested his limits as they had done with countless species before. He broke bones. He bled. He screamed once, maybe twice, when they pushed too far. But he did not beg. He did not surrender. And each time they left him alone, cameras caught the same expression settling on his face. A grin, sharp and haunting. The Cathari began to argue among themselves. One noted, neural patterns show resilience beyond predicted models. Another hissed, the subject adapts to pain in real time. He is learning. A third, more cautious voice whispered, we may have underestimated the psychological variables. This subject unnerves me, but the Directorate dismissed caution. They had dissected titans before. What was one human? What they did not know was that humans, when pushed into corners, do not break the way other species do. They bend, they fracture, but in the cracks something feral blooms, something older than history, deeper than instinct. A refusal, not survival for its own sake, but survival as rebellion. By the seventh day, the human no longer struggled against restraints. He sat, head bowed, breathing steady, eyes closed. The researchers assumed sedation had worked too well. They leaned closer, curious, eager to peel away the last layers of mystery. But when one reached to adjust a probe, the human's eyes snapped open, blue, cold, alive. He whispered something in his native tongue. The translators caught fragments only. Pain is nothing. The researcher recoiled, unsettled. The human should not have been conscious, not with the cocktail of chemicals flooding his system. Yet here he was, speaking, smiling, bleeding, but unbroken. And then the accidents began. A power surge disabled one of the restraints for a fraction of a second. too brief for any creature to exploit, except a human. His arm shot out, bone cracking as he forced muscles against tendons not meant to move that way. Fingers closed around a tool one of the researchers had left nearby. He didn't use it immediately. He hid it, tucked it beneath his palm, and slumped as though unconscious again. The directorate reviewed footage later and realized their mistake. They should have noticed the twitch of his lips, the faint glimmer in his eyes. They should have realized he was waiting, watching, planning. Humans are patient predators. By day 10, the experiment had shifted. No longer were the researchers observing the human. The human was observing them. He listened to their debates, watched their routines, memorized their codes. Every injection, every meal, every probe, they became data points in his mind, threads weaving into a strategy. He had no weapons, no allies. His body was broken and failing. But he had one advantage the Cathari had never accounted for. He wanted to win, and that desire, that reckless, illogical, impossible refusal to surrender, and was about to turn their experiment into a nightmare. Because the human was no longer their subject, they were his. The directorate believed it still held control. Charts and graphs displayed neural activity, heart rate, hormone surges. They congratulated themselves for their data collection, for pushing the human beyond recorded thresholds. What they did not see, buried beneath numbers and curves, was intent. The human had begun cataloging them, every shift, every procedure. Every word that slipped unguarded through their translated speech became fuel for something the Cathari could not measure. Strategy. Their arrogance blinded them. They thought in terms of variables and constants, equations and percentages. They had never faced a species that could take pain itself and forge it into a weapon. On the 12th day, the directorate attempted a new trial. They released the human into a simulation chamber, a vast holographic arena designed to mimic hostile environments. For most species, it was an effective test. They would panic, lash out, attempt escape, and the simulation would reveal their instincts. For the human, the environment was a playground. The chamber shifted from desert to Arctic wasteland, from volcanic plains to flooded ruins. Sensors monitored his every step, anticipating collapse. Yet he did not collapse. He adapted. When water rose above his head, he held his breath longer than their models predicted. When volcanic heat seared his skin, he crawled forward with blistered hands. When frost-bitten winds froze his joints, he broke icicles from the walls and used them as tools. He was not surviving. He was practicing. Subject shows abnormal adaptability, one scientist muttered, talons clicking nervously against their datapad. Impossible, another retorted. No organism can adjust this quickly without prior conditioning. And yet, it was happening. The human collapsed at last, but not from the environment. He collapsed deliberately at the precise moment they expected failure. The researchers logged the data, convinced they had pushed him past endurance. They did not see the way he angled his fall to conceal the shard of glass he had pried loose from the simulation's flooring. They wheeled him back to the sterile chamber, unaware that the experiment was unraveling. By day 15, the human had tested his shard. Weak alloy restraints scratched and dented when pressed with enough force. He worked in silence, never drawing attention, grinding metal inch by inch while monitors displayed nothing but stable vitals. He hid the movement beneath tremors, beneath labored breaths, disguising rebellion as weakness, and the directorate still underestimated him. They debated ethics, not of the experiment itself. Such concepts were beneath them, but of the best way to dissect him once the trial ended. Should they preserve neural pathways intact or harvest organs first? Should they attempt cloning? Each discussion was clinical, detached, and yet every word carried to the human's ears. He listened, memorizing, letting their casual cruelty temper his resolve. That night, when the lights dimmed and the chamber fell silent, a sound broke through the stillness. A laugh, at first soft like a cough, then louder. The alien observers froze. Through speakers, they heard the subject laughing, not with hysteria, not with delirium, but with something cold, something deliberate. Why does he laugh? One demanded. Neural activity suggests breakdown, another replied, too quickly. But deep down they knew it was not a breakdown. It was a warning. By the 20th day, tension fractured the directorate itself. Some argued the human should be terminated immediately before variables spiraled beyond control. Others insisted the data was too valuable. Fear warred with curiosity, but in their hesitation they gave him time, and time was all he needed. The first kill was not dramatic. It was quiet, calculated. A careless researcher leaned too close while adjusting restraints. The shard, hidden in the human's hand for days, slid across alien flesh. The scientist gasped, stumbled, collapsed. The human caught the body before it struck the floor, muffling the sound. He stripped tools, a keycard, and the sleek communicator from the corpse. By the time guards arrived, the body was gone, dissolved into acid disposal vents. The directorate reviewed the footage hours later and found nothing unusual. Cameras had been looped. Sensors showed stable readings. The human had erased his first strike as if it had never happened. They did not understand. Their subject was not just enduring the experiment anymore. He was running his own. Each day, another accident. A missing tool. A guard who never returned from patrol. A power fluctuation at exactly the wrong moment. The directorate blamed malfunctions, incompetence, sabotage from rivals. None of them considered the truth that the human was orchestrating chaos from inside their perfect machine. The survivors began to whisper. Even the most hardened scientists lowered their voices when near the chamber. They spoke of his eyes, how they glowed in the dim light, of his silence broken only by sudden laughter, of the feeling, irrational, impossible, that they were no longer studying him at all. They were prey, and on the 25th day, the human confirmed it. During a standard neural probe test, the lead researcher leaned close, demanding answers. "Why do you persist, human? Why will you not break?" For the first time, he spoke clearly into the translator, his voice steady and cold. "Because breaking is not in our nature, but killing." That is, the chamber fell silent. The researchers stared, paralyzed. For the first time, they felt it, the shift, the inversion of control. The subject was no longer restrained by their machines. He was restrained only by his choice, and choice for a human was deadlier than any weapon. The Cathari Directorate prided itself on order. Every experiment followed procedure, every variable controlled, every result predictable. But by the 30th day, order had dissolved into whispers and fear. The human no longer looked like a subject bound in their chamber. He looked like a predator waiting in the tall grass. The staff tried to ignore it. They adjusted probes, collected samples, ran their endless tests. But each time they entered the chamber, they felt it, the weight of his gaze. He watched them the way hunters watch prey, unblinking, calculating. The laughter had stopped, but the silence was worse. It meant he no longer needed to unsettle them. He had already won the first battle, their fear. The second battle was physical. The shard of glass had been only the beginning. With each malfunction, the human scavenged more. A broken probe became a crude blade. A discarded restraint became a lockpick. Tiny circuits, palmed from disassembled devices, became sparks of possibility. Piece by piece, he was building something the Directorate could not chart on their graphs. Freedom. And still, they underestimated him. "His mind is breaking down," one researcher insisted, pointing at erratic neural patterns. "No," countered another uneasily. "It is reorganizing." But their debate came too late. The first open act of defiance happened during what should have been a routine endurance trial. They increased gravity in the chamber to 3 times normal, expecting him to collapse under the crushing weight. Instead, he stood. Every muscle shook, veins bulged, but he refused to fall. Step by agonizing step, he moved forward, dragging himself across the floor until he reached the observation window. He pressed a bloodied hand against the glass and locked eyes with the lead researcher. His lips moved slowly, deliberately, so the translator would capture every word. "You think this is control? It is not. It is training." Then he dropped to one knee, finally succumbing to exhaustion. But the words lingered, echoing through every corridor. The Qatari had built prisons before. They had studied beasts that tore moons apart. Yet none had spoken like that. None had dared to tell them their experiment was a stepping stone, not a cage. The Directorate tried to tighten security. More guards, more cameras, more sedatives. But security measures are only useful against enemies who fight predictably. The human did not. On the 32nd day, he struck again. This time there were witnesses. A guard entered the chamber to check restraints. The human slumped, feigning unconsciousness. The guard leaned close, just as the first victim had. A flick of the wrist, a shard concealed beneath the skin-tight cuff of his wrist, metal-sliced flesh. In seconds the guard collapsed, throat open, alarms blared. Door sealed, weapons primed. The researchers screamed commands to restrain him, to sedate him, to flood the chamber with gas. But the human moved before they could act. He caught the guard's weapon as the body fell and pressed it against the nearest restraint. Sparks flew, the cuffs snapped. He was free. The directorate watched in stunned silence. A human, sedated, malnourished, beaten and broken, stood upright, weapon in hand, eyes burning with defiance. The chamber became a killing ground. Guards poured in, claws snapping, energy rifles blazing. He moved like water, ducking, weaving, striking with precision. He was not the strongest. He was not the fastest. But he was relentless. Every movement was an attack, every injury ignored. He fought not to survive the moment, but to break the cycle of control. 3 guards fell before the directorate cut power to the chamber. Darkness swallowed everything. Yet in the dark, their monitors picked up a sound that froze them in place. Not screaming, not pleading. Breathing. Steady. Controlled. Predatory. When emergency lights flickered back on, the human was gone. Panic spread through the facility. Security combed corridors, sensors scanned every chamber, alarms shrieked. The Cathari had built their station to contain nightmares, but nightmares had never been human. The first patrol found the bodies in Corridor 12. 4 guards, throats slit with surgical precision. Their weapons missing, their comms disabled. On the wall, smeared in their own blood, a single word written in jagged human script: run. The researchers debated evacuation. Some argued the subject could not possibly survive long without supplies. Others insisted he was adapting faster than they could predict. The council of the directorate itself grew restless. They had wanted knowledge. They had wanted to dissect a curiosity. Instead, they had created a predator in their midst, and the predator was learning their ship. Each day, systems failed in patterns too deliberate to be coincidence. Cameras flickered out in key corridors. Life support wavered for seconds at a time, enough to disorient but not kill. Communications jammed when patrols tried to report sightings. It was as if the entire facility had become his hunting ground. The alien researchers began posting guards outside their own quarters, terrified of shadows. Every creak of metal, every flicker of light became a reminder that the human was still out there, watching, waiting. By the 40th day, paranoia ruled the station. Scientists who once scoffed at fear now jumped at whispers. Soldiers patrolled in squads, but squads vanished into silence. Morale broke. The directorate, masters of control, were themselves unraveled by the one thing they never accounted for: defiance made flesh, and through it all, the human left signs. Not random acts of violence, but messages carved into walls left beside corpses, etched into consoles. You should have let me die. Your mistake was thinking I was yours. We are not prey. Each message carried the same signature. A grin drawn in blood. Mocking, taunting, promising that the worst was yet to come. The Kethari had begun an experiment. Now, they were trapped in his. The directorate had always believed in order, in sterile halls and flawless systems. But by the 45th day, their research station no longer resembled a laboratory. It was a battlefield, one they did not understand, and one they were losing. They doubled the guard patrols, locked down entire wings, and flooded corridors with surveillance drones. Still, the humans slipped through the cracks like smoke. He moved in ways their minds could not predict. He never struck the same place twice, never left the same kind of mark. Every kill was different, as if he was studying them as much as they had studied him. The scientists stopped sleeping. They huddled together in the mess halls, clutching data pads like weapons. Conversations were short, sharp, filled with dread. "He cannot survive much longer," one whispered. "He has no food, no shelter." But another shook their head, trembling. "You do not understand. He is feeding off us. off our fear. And it was true, the human no longer looked like a man broken by experiments. Sightings reported him gaunt but alert, eyes sharper than ever, movements more deliberate. He was injured, limping, bleeding, but he used his injuries to bait them. Patrols followed trails of blood only to be ambushed from above, below, within the shadows. He weaponized weakness, turning their expectations into his traps. On the 50th day, the Directorate convened in the command chamber. The Council's voices, usually calm and calculated, cracked with desperation. We must terminate the subject. Terminate? With what forces? Every squad we send vanishes. Then we abandon the station. Let it burn. No, if he survives, the galaxy will know. Our reputation, our dominance, it will collapse. Their pride anchored them. Even now, with bodies piling up, they refuse to admit failure. They would rather die than confess that one human had broken them. The human listened. From the ventilation shafts above, he crouched in silence, the stolen communicator feeding him their words. He smiled to himself in the darkness. They were still thinking of reputation, of dominance, of the experiment. They had not realized the truth. The experiment had ended. The hunt had begun. That night, the power grid failed completely. The station plunged into blackness. Emergency lights flickered, painting the halls in pulses of crimson. Sirens wailed. Panic spread. Guards fired into shadows, killing their own in confusion. Scientists screamed as doors sealed behind them, trapping them in airtight chambers. The air pump stopped. Breathing became a struggle. And through it all, a sound carried through the dark. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Echoing down corridors. The guards rallied, weapons raised. "Show yourself!" One shouted into the void. Silence. Then laughter. It rolled through the halls, bouncing off metal walls impossible to locate. The sound of a man broken by pain yet burning with purpose. The guards broke formation. Fear gnawed at discipline. Shots rang out, hitting nothing. The laughter faded, replaced by whispers. Whispers in a language the translator could not parse, syllables rough and alien to their ears. But the meaning was clear. A hunter circling prey. By morning, the Directorate counted 23 more dead. The command chamber was in chaos. "He dismantles the systems as if he built them." One cried, "He is not trained for this." But another scientist, trembling, answered, "No, he learns. That is what he does. That is what humans do. We broke his body, but we sharpened his mind. He is becoming what we made him." The human did not strike the command chamber directly. He did not need to. He struck everywhere else, isolating them, starving them, suffocating them. Entire wings went dark, their occupants never seen again. Messages appeared on the walls in crude human script. Still here. Still learning. Still hunting. They tried gas. They tried sound weapons. They even tried fire, flooding entire sections with burning plasma. But the human adapted. He disappeared into coolant shafts, into maintenance tunnels too narrow for drones. Fire blackened his skin, but he emerged stronger, eyes alight with something the Cathari had never seen before. Joy in the struggle. Because humans are not designed for perfection. They are designed for resistance, for chaos, for war. The researchers began to break. Some begged to leave, clawing at the Council's authority. Others tried to defect, sending desperate signals into space. None escaped. The human cut their transmissions, left their corpses hanging in hallways as warnings. On the 55th day, the Council made a desperate choice. They deployed the hunters. The hunters were not researchers. They were the Directorate's enforcers, creatures bred for pursuit and termination. Twice the size of a human, armored with chitin that deflected bullets, claws that could shear metal, eyes that saw heat in darkness. They had never failed. They stalked the corridors with precision, communicating in clicks and growls, sealing the humans' escape routes. The Directorate watched through their helmet feeds, confidence surging for the first time in weeks. The hunters found him in a collapsed maintenance shaft, bloodied and half-buried in debris. They surrounded him, claws gleaming, voices clicking in triumph. The human looked up at them. He was broken, burned, bleeding, and he grinned. The first hunter lunged. Too fast, too strong. The human did not block. He rolled aside, forcing the hunter into the shaft's collapsing walls. Metal speared its chest. The second hunter swiped, claws shredding air. The human ducked, driving a stolen blade into the joint of its armor. The third hunter closed in, but the human had already stripped a weapon from the second, firing point blank into its skull. 3 hunters. 3 corpses. The directorate watched in horror as the feed went dark, one by one, replaced by static. Then a new feed flickered on. The human had taken one of the helmets, its camera showing his blood-smeared face. He leaned close, breathing ragged, eyes bright. "You wanted to study me. Congratulations, you just made me worse." Then he smashed the helmet. The directorate knew then what they had unleashed could not be contained. But by then, it was far too late. The station was no longer a place of research. It was a graveyard orbiting in silence above a barren moon, its halls littered with scorched walls and broken bodies. Every surviving member of the directorate walked with trembling hands, their eyes darting at shadows, their voices hushed to whispers. Even the counselors, once towering in their authority, now looked like cornered prey. The human had stripped them of their security, their certainty, and their pride. He had dismantled their station piece by piece, not with weapons of mass destruction, but with patience, cunning, and an indomitable will to survive. Every corridor told a story, burn marks on steel from makeshift explosives, severed conduits flooding rooms with sparks and choking smoke, messages scratched into walls in his crude language. Still alive, still hunting, still learning. The scientists tried not to look, but the guards, what was left of them, read those words with a shiver that tightened their grips on their weapons. The directorate counselors refused to accept defeat. They gathered in the command chamber, voices trembling but still commanding. "He cannot be allowed to escape. If he reaches another system, he will spread this terror. He will tell the galaxy what we did." Another counselor slammed his claws against the table. "He already has escaped us. We are not hunters anymore. We are the prey." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The truth spoken aloud was unbearable. They had not captured a specimen. They had unleashed a predator, and he was not finished. On the 60th day, the human struck with a boldness that stunned them. No more whispers in the dark, no more isolated kills. He came for the central reactor, cutting through guard lines with scavenged weapons and sheer brutality. He moved like a ghost and a storm at once, appearing, vanishing, returning with more violence each time. The directorate watched in horror through fractured security feeds as squads fell. Screams filled the comms, cut short by static. Explosions rattled the structure, lights flickered, and the hum of the reactor stuttered dangerously. When they finally caught sight of him on the cameras, he was limping, blood dripping from burns across his chest. But his movements were steady, relentless. He was not fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting to win. The council ordered full mobilization. Every guard, every drone, every remaining asset converged on the reactor core. The human waited for them there, crouched in shadows, watching the numbers swell against him. Hundreds of weapons raised, hundreds of eyes burning with fear disguised as resolve. The lead enforcer barked a command. "You cannot escape, human. Lay down your arms." The human did not answer. He stood slowly, blade in one hand, stolen plasma rifle in the other. His face was pale, his body torn apart, but his eyes blazed. He looked at them all, hundreds of enemies all surrounding him, and he laughed. It was not the laugh of madness. It was the laugh of defiance, of one man daring to spit in the face of an empire. And then he moved. What followed was chaos. Explosions tore through the chamber as he set off charges he had hidden earlier. Fire ripped across the lines, scattering the guards. The human weaved through smoke and flame, his rifle spitting plasma, his blades slashing at anything that drew near. He was unstoppable, not because he was invulnerable. He was bleeding out with every step, but because he refused to fall. One by one, the guards broke. Some fled, others fired wildly, hitting comrades in their desperation. The drones fell from the air, their circuits fried by the human sabotage. And in the heart of the reactor, with alarms blaring and systems failing, the man who should have been their specimen stood like a war god, dragging their empire into ruin. By the time it ended, the chamber was littered with corpses, Smoke hung thick, alarm screamed, and the reactor's hum had become unstable. The human staggered forward, his body broken but his will unbroken. He pressed a control panel, rerouting power lines, setting fail-safes to overload. The Directorate counselors, watching from their hidden chamber, realized too late what he was doing. "He will destroy the station," one gasped. "He will kill us all." He would rather burn alive than surrender, and that was the truth. Humans do not surrender. They do not accept cages, experiments, or chains. If cornered, they will fight. If broken, they will crawl. And if left with nothing, they will drag their enemies into the abyss with them. The human collapsed against the console, coughing blood, his breaths ragged. He knew the reactor would go critical soon. He knew he would not survive the explosion. But as his vision blurred, he allowed himself one last smile. They had thought him weak. They had thought him a test subject. They had thought themselves gods. Now they would learn what it meant to awaken a monster. The countdown began. Warning sirens blared through every deck, automated voices shrieking in panicked repetition, "Reactor critical. Evacuate immediately." Red strobes flashed across the corridors, throwing broken walls and bodies into chaotic light. The Directorate had prided itself on absolute control. Now their control was gone. Their scientists scrambled like frightened animals, tripping over one another as they rushed for escape pods. Guards abandoned their posts, their weapons clattering to the ground as survival instincts overpowered loyalty. Order collapsed, hierarchy crumbled, and centuries of arrogance burned in the span of minutes. And at the center of it all, the human dragged himself across the floor of the reactor chamber, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Every breath rattled like broken glass. His body was failing, but his spirit burned brighter than the reactor about to detonate. He had no escape plan. He had never expected to leave this station alive. But it did not matter, because his victory was not survival. His victory was destruction. For the first time, the Directorate knew fear. True fear. Not the fear of failure or loss of status, but the primal terror of facing something they could not control, could not predict, could not break. They had captured a man thinking he would be a specimen. Instead, they had created a legend. The counselors gathered in their private escape module, screens showing chaos unraveling across the station. "Launch now!" one demanded, his voice cracking, but another counselor hesitated, claws shaking. "If he lives, if he survives this, he will not." The first roared. No one could survive. They sealed their pod and launched into the void, abandoning the station they had once ruled from like gods. In their haste, they never realized that the human had already sabotaged the docking bay's systems. The pod's thrusters sputtered, failed, and sent them spinning helplessly into the black void, powerless as the reactor's countdown reached its final seconds. The human leaned back against the console, eyes half closed. Around him, the chamber shuddered, walls buckling under the strain of unstable energy. Heat washed over him, blistering skin that was already scarred and burned. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the nightmare began, he allowed himself to feel stillness. In the silence of his mind, he thought of home, of skies filled with stars, of winds rushing over green hills, of voices that were not screams but laughter. He had been torn away from it all, reduced to a number in an alien experiment. But even here, in chains, he had remained human. And that meant one thing: he refused to surrender. The reactor roared. Light swallowed the chamber. The station ripped apart in a wave of fire that reached out into the void, tearing steel and flesh alike into dust. For a moment, the darkness of space was lit by a sun that was never meant to exist. And then silence returned. The station was gone. The Directorate's pride, their power, their experiment, all reduced to drifting fragments. But legends are not destroyed so easily. Across the galaxy, distress signals escaped before the end. Fractured, broken transmissions carried fragments of the story. A human specimen who refused to die, who fought back against impossible odds, who destroyed his captors in a blaze of fire. Entire civilizations intercepted those signals, piecing together the tale. And for the first time, the galaxy trembled at the thought of humanity. They were not the strongest species. Not the fastest, not the most advanced, not the most disciplined. But they carried within them something far more dangerous than claws or plasma or technology. They carried defiance, a refusal to bow, to break, to surrender. The story spread like wildfire. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, a myth born of chaos. Others believed every word. Whispers grew in shadowed corners of space stations and marketplaces. Do not provoke them. Do not cage them. Do not study them. Humans do not surrender, and the directorate, their empire never recovered. The loss of the station shattered their reputation. Rivals rose, allies abandoned them, and within decades their once mighty influence crumbled. They had been undone not by war fleets or political maneuvering, but by a single human who refused to accept chains. Some said he died in the explosion. Others swore he lived, slipping into the void on stolen technology. And in the centuries that followed, rumors persisted of a scarred figure appearing in the shadows of alien wars, turning the tide, reminding the galaxy of the one truth that could not be erased. Humans are not prey. Humans are predators, and when pushed into a corner, when broken and bleeding, when stripped of everything but their will, they become monsters, monsters who will fight until nothing remains, not even themselves. The experiment had been meant to prove superiority. Instead, it proved terror. It proved resilience. It proved that humans, fragile as they might appear, carried within them something no scientist could measure and no empire could contain. The aliens wanted to study humans. They made a mistake because what they found was not a subject. What they found was the end, and the galaxy would never forget it.